I'm very English. I'm from the UK. We're based in London, and I have to admit, I have probably one of the best jobs ever. And what I do is I'm a fashion scout, and I look after the community of designers for Not Just a Label. So for those of you who haven't heard about us, Not Just a Label is an online platform and community for fashion designers around the world. We have 17,000 designers with us from 110 countries. So that's obviously a huge number, and it kind of gives an example of how much is out there and how much sort of competition that everyone has. And I mean, I say no to a lot of people, so even 17,000 is quite a curated amount. And what we do is we go around the world, or I get to travel around the world and meet new people and basically tell them about what we do and bring them together. So by having all these designers together, we can then sort of power in numbers. We're able to try and push change for especially the industry for young designers, because as everyone has been saying in the last few days, there's countless amount of problems and hurdles that everyone has to go through. So we go around the world and then we talk to them and basically found out that almost every designer has the same problem. They don't have any money, and they don't have enough stockists. So what we try and do is come up with ways to get over these hurdles. So the first thing is I'll tell you a little bit about what we do in terms of our website. So our website is a platform, and with that we can then cut out the middlemen, and we use that as a way to promote designers that we want to promote. So we have something around, it's like 5 million hits a month, and many followers and all that kind of stuff. So in many ways we're our own press. So we don't have to go to press if we want to promote a designer, we can do it ourselves. So again, that's cutting out the middleman, and that means we can work quite quickly. So this is an example of our front cover, and on the front cover what we do is we promote designers all the time. So it's the easiest thing in the world to put a designer on the front cover. We also do interviews, and also that's part of our sort of online magazine, which is articles and things that are industry ready. So we're not sort of particularly excited about things like show reviews. It's more about sort of essays that are important for young designers, things young designers should be reading about. So how to do costings, etc., etc. I'll go through this quite quickly because I want to talk about something else. So this is a Not Just a Label profile. So basically what we do is any designer who's invited to join can have one of these. And what this is a place they can present their work online. So when we started, the reason why we started, which was 6 years ago, is designers didn't really have a place to showcase their work digitally. For the designers out there, and probably for the buyer and the press, you probably know that a lot of designers' personal websites are rubbish, or they're almost impossible to read, or they're far too conceptual, and because it's been made by their friend who's like this MA in graphic design, and it looks cool, but you can't get an email. Or maybe their email address is something really silly, like sexykitten101@hotmail.com. So immediately you kind of lose interest. So what we did is we created a standardized template where anyone, it was press or buyers or whoever's interested, can actually go through a list of designers quite quickly. And you can do that by, if everything is in the exact same place, you can go through 50 of these quite quickly because you know exactly where to look. If you're interested in where they come from, you look on the left-hand side and there's the city, their names, their actual collections, if they sell, which I'll explain, is their shop products, fashion films, and a bit about themselves. So every designer gets this, and this is for free. We don't charge designers because, well, what's the point? They don't have any money, so we don't charge designers. But obviously 17,000 is far too many for anyone to really use this as an industry tool, because if the press want to find designers, say if they want to find the best women's wear designers from Dubai or from Beirut or Costa Rica or Kiev, they can go on here. But we represent so many that going for a list of 600 designers from Ukraine is too big. So we have the black sheep section. And the black sheep section is something that I run as I look after the community. And the black sheep section is, we don't say best, we say industry ready, because we don't like to say favorites and we don't like to be biased. But there are favorites. And there's 1,000 of them. And then that list still sounds big, but it's not really, because the time you've clicked menswear New York, that list has gone right down to like 5 or 10. So though it sounds big, it's really not when you start using it as a tool. So that means that when press or buyers want to use this directory to actually discover talent, they a sort of guaranteed good quality, because everyone on this black sheep section is good. And when I say good, which we'll talk about more, it's like having this full package. So the imagery is up to scratch. I mean, we're online, so our biggest problem or our biggest limitation is imagery. If the imagery is rubbish, we can't use it. And unfortunately, I think there's a bit of a trick where we have some designers that are okay, but they have incredible imagery. So then they're seen as incredible designers, but they're just okay with an amazing art team. And then we have incredible designers with okay imagery, and then unfortunately in an online space, that means they're an okay designer, they're not an incredible designer. So one of the biggest things we do is always just telling people to retake their pictures. And we do this all for free. And like I said, there's no point charging designers, we don't have any money. And also, I think when you're talking to someone, you're trying to give someone advice, they listen to you more if you don't charge them, because if you're trying to sell them something like a consultancy package, unless you are a professional consultant, that's what they've come for, they're not going to trust you so much, because whatever you say is probably going to be something that leads to, you lacking in this, so you need this, and we can sell this to you for X amount. So we're completely for free. The good thing about being for free, it means that I can tell designers off, and they have to listen to me because I'm doing it for their own good. So one of the things I do most of the time is actually telling people off. We then work for bigger institutions too, and this is because now we have access to 17,000 designers, and obviously now everyone's interested in young designers. It is a trend. Big brands come to us because they want access to these designers, and we're kind of like the gatekeepers, because we wouldn't let a big brand just start working with one. I mean, if a big brand wants to work with a young designer, it never works, because you've got this huge corporate brand trying to work with one kid who makes dresses in their mum's kitchen. It never works. So what we do is we work as a gatekeeper and work on big projects, and basically that's how we make our money. So that's why we don't have to charge designers. And the thing that we always talk about is, people ask, who cares about young designers? You can go and buy a really lovely dress now. You can do it online. You can go to a shop. And so we really try and push this idea of authentic luxury. So when we say authentic luxury, we mean what classes as luxury. We can go and buy a bag that's very, very expensive. We could say it's £4,000. Say £4,000 for a certain brand for a bag. If you buy that in Harrods, you're not really buying a £4,000 bag. You're buying a good quality bag because it's a good brand, but most of what you're paying for is that label, right? And it leads to a lifestyle because you're carrying that bag, and some of these bags are very hard to get, so it means that you have the power and influence to get hold of that bag, so there's so much that comes behind it. But once you've got that bag, there's probably about another 15,000 women that have the same handbag as you. So is that luxury, or is luxury actually now having something that no one has access to, or is only made in a very small run? So that's what we push as an idea of real luxury. So when we talk about it, we really try and tell the story of the designers and all that kind of stuff, because that's what's interesting. We have designers that do the weirdest things. There's one guy in Berlin, and he makes bridal dresses, but in his studio, he has a collection of 37 giant African snails, and he lets them crawl up his body while he's working, because he lives off their creative juices. So he'll be like fixing a dress while there's like a big, smelly snail on his head. So this is quite cool for people who want that idea of luxury. So everything that we do for the good of our designers. And the reason why we probably sometimes get in trouble or offend people, because we try and cut out the middleman in every way we can. I mean, a designer can't just exist and then directly contact with the customer. There has to be someone in between. But I think for young designers, and when I say young designers, I mean people we work with, they're either like literally fresh out of school, but are ready to go, or there's someone who's been doing this for like 6 years, but wants to be a bit smaller, a bit sort of select, and a bit elite. But we try and help them everywhere we can. So basically, by cutting out by cutting out the middleman, because they're just expensive, basically. By using online, what you can do is you could say, if you sell online, then you sell globally. So therefore, maybe that says that maybe you could argue that maybe you don't need seasons anymore, because if you sell truly globally and you have customers who are global, you could sell a pair of swim shorts in the morning and a coat in the evening. So if that's true, why would you make seasons? Because that's irrelevant now. If we are selling globally with online platforms, maybe you don't need seasons. And seasons is probably one of the things that cripples young designers the most, because you're constantly chasing yourself for a rule that's just, I mean, it's there for a reason, and obviously buyers live by that rule, they live by that schedule, and at the end of the day, they're creating work at a certain time, so it's ready for the designers when they're ready for the buyers when the buyers go to Paris. But if we could cut all that out, then maybe they don't need to have collection seasons, and therefore they simply release a body of work when it's ready, so like a printmaker. So that's the intro quite quick, because the thing I really wanted to talk about were these 5 tips for emerging designers. So this is something that I've come up with over the last couple of years, and they're not get-rich-quick schemes, unfortunately, for the sexy title that I called this, but it's more ideas that I think if they're truly embedded in a young brand early on, it helps the designers as a business understand who they are, what they're selling, and most importantly, who they're selling it to. I think we were joking that sometimes maybe for young designers, our perfect customer is a little bit like a sort of mythical creature, because we're designing for maybe the person that we wish that we were. So we're pretty young, we're good looking, we're in good shape, we've got loads of money, we've got good taste, we live in a place where we have access to the right kind of stores. But I don't know how many of these people really exist. So, if your market is someone who's under 25, but everything's really expensive, how many 25-year-olds can afford a hoodie that's $4,000? So, I think sometimes young designers don't think about that, even though that should be like rule 101. So we'll go through these, and within reason, if anyone wants to argue with me, they can. So feel free to just sort of shout if something's horrendously out of your mind. So this is the first one, which is called Have Some Roots. So this is about, I think, because we really celebrate designers around the world, and that's what's most interesting. Designers in New York and London and Paris, they get enough press as it is. So I think this idea of authentic luxury, it's kind of cooler to have a dress or a jacket that's made by someone who's got this tiny little studio in Cape Town or whatever. So I think it's really about embracing where they're from. I mean, it doesn't mean that if you're from India, you have to have something that relates to India, but if you have an amazing heritage and you're from a family that makes and does embroidery, then you should kind of use that because you have access to it. There's these 2 pictures which I'll quickly talk about, which is probably one of my favorites. So this one on the left is this guy's like 19, and he's called Anton Belinsky, and he's from Kiev. And he did his collection, he did his lookbook, and then everything started kicking off in Kiev. And Meldine Square is, I don't know if you know, but that's sort of where this was the center of everything that was going on. Literally, like, just insane. It was a war zone. And this girl's 15, and he convinced her, I don't think he told her what she was doing, but basically she was going to be a model for his new lookbook. And he took her right to the center of the square and made her do this. And you can probably see this man on the left. He's like a legitimate riot police. So they did this whole lookbook in the middle of just absolute madness. And he did it because it was I think it was a bit of a fingers up to what was going on. And I think he was just sort of trying to say, I do design, and Kiev is still a place of creativity, and we don't want it to be defined by what's going on. So this was good. This is another one of my favorites. This is a guy called Artsy. He's from Morocco. He's got an interesting story. I'll tell you about it later. But basically, we had an opportunity to send him to Ethiopia Fashion Week, which is quite an odd, very small event. But he took advantage of it because when he was there, he realized that just all the women were absolutely stunning and they fit into what he does. So he took his best friend who was a photographer, and I think they just found these girls like in a restaurant or something. And the next day, they just did this photo shoot. And these are 2 examples of really embracing what's going on around you. And therefore, it's more interesting. I mean, sometimes people say they're not interested in the story, but I think for young designers, that's what you should talk about, because you're not selling your brand, because no one knows who you are. The next one is take responsibility and know who you're working with. So I don't know if everyone would agree with me, but I think sustainable fashion or ethical fashion is becoming a slightly dirty word now, because maybe it's been tainted by quite a lot of, to be honest, bad design. And some companies have used it slightly in a gimmicky way, and therefore a lot of people don't want to be associated with that because they think it's a bit, not quite sure if it's what they want to do. But I don't think that sustainability means organic cotton or using hemp and things like that. Being sustainable is simply coming up with a way to sort of run your business in a very controlled way and ultimately save money and, of course, save materials and save on production. The best way of saving on production, I think, is simply to control it. It doesn't mean that you have to make the stuff yourself, but I think to start off with, when you're a designer and you don't have any money, you should, if possible, you should try and get this stuff produced where you live. Because if it's in the city you live, if there's anything going on, you jump in your car, you drive to the factory, and you can see exactly what's going on. You can see who's working on it. You can see the working conditions. You can see how much that person is being paid. If you just send it around the world, you don't really know what's going on until the item has actually been delivered to your studio. And by then, it's probably too late to make any changes. So I think when you're starting out, you should really use this as like a positive design opportunity. And things like zero waste policy and pattern cutting, it's genius. And that's a way where you simply can just save lots of money. And that's without having to be all big and brazen about being ethical and sustainable. You can just do things in a clever way. And if your stuff is made in the city where you're based, then you're saving the world because you're not shipping stuff around the world. So there are many ways of doing it. You don't have to be a Greenpeace eco-warrior, I think, to just sort of be a bit better. This is my favorite slide. It took a very long time to decide the pictures for this. But basically, this is don't be arrogant. So I don't know if I really need to explain it very much. But basically, because I deal with a lot of people, and they're from all around the world, and they're all different ages, sometimes I meet some horrendous divas, or people that maybe just, if they keep behaving the way they behave, they're simply not going to make any money because no one wants to be with them in a business sense because you can't trust them. One of my favorite stories is it was a really young girl that I met. She just graduated and I saw her show, and she had menswear, which was nice, but she had these leather bags, and these leather bags were like super cool, really, really nice. They were like quite cheap. She could really do something really smart with them. So I met her and was like, cool, this is really smart. We should get you in the shop. And she said, okay, cool, sounds good. I'll get everything ready and I'll give you a call tomorrow. So that was it. We said goodbye. I didn't hear from her for 3 weeks. So I sent her a couple of emails, no reply, and I called her. And I was like, what's going on? And she went, Rob, I'm so sorry. It's been so hard this week. It's been my birthday. And then so I don't want to be the diva, but then you can't carry on a conversation with someone who says they want to run a business, but when it's their birthday, they have to stop. So that's an example of someone who maybe misbehaves. And I think also, like I say here about the slamming door thing, I think when people start, some young designers, when they start, they think, my dresses are this much. It's £6,000 for a dress. I only am going to sell in Dover Street Market, and I'm going to sell in Hoston in Shoreditch. And I'm not going to do any PR because people should just know who I am because I go to the right parties in London. And that's it. And everyone else can piss off. And so, but when they're offered something else, which is maybe not what they planned, they might say, well, I don't want to do that because I think it's going to corrupt my brand. But these guys don't have a brand because they've just started. So they should just run with what they've got. I mean, obviously, you can't just say yes to everything. But I think you should be aware of what you're doing and always leave on a good way, because sometimes you need to just sell out and actually make some money. So, if you could secretly sell some designs to a high street brand without anyone knowing, why not? Make some money from it. So that's don't be arrogant. The fourth one is do it yourself. So this is the one where I got a bit too excited and ended up upsetting a few people because I was saying that you should do everything yourself. I still believe that. And when I say that, I don't mean that only one person should do it, but basically keeping it in-house. Because, again, a problem that we have, I think with young designers especially, sometimes they've already decided exactly where they're going to sell, and they've decided that their work will only look good next to Kenzo and Margiela and all of this kind of stuff. And then, so they're like, right, how do I achieve this? And then they're approached by someone that says, your work is going to be really big in Tokyo, so you should have a sales agent in Tokyo that looks after all of that attention you're going to get in Tokyo. And then someone says, yeah, but you also really need a PR agency in London, so, we can look after you. We can make sure that you do the right things and all this kind of stuff. And before you know it, you've spent about £10,000 a year on PR. and you've got a sales agent in Tokyo, and you don't have any stockists, and it's just you, and now you don't have any money. So I'm not saying that PR is bad, but I think it's more you should know when to start using this stuff, and when you're a certain size of a company, then you can start outsourcing your production or outsourcing various things. But you should keep doing it until you literally can't do it anymore because it's too big. If you only get 2 emails a week and you do 1 press request a month, why do you need a PR agency? You can do that. And we had another horror story of a guy who was in London. I won't mention names, but he had a PR agency. And he wasn't paying the full whack because he was getting quite well known, but he was paying a decent sum of money. And one of the rules was that he would have to pay for expenses. And they would only bill him quarterly. And so it was like coming up for Christmas time, and he opens up his invoice, and he's been, who knows what Claridge's is? Claridge's is like the super nice hotel in London. And one of the things that people like to do is go for high tea in Claridge's. So that means just a mountain of tuna sandwiches and tea and all that stuff. And it's very expensive. So he opens up his expenses account, and he's been billed £555 for high tea for 6 people. So he's a bit not quite. He's like, I don't remember going to Claridge's. So he calls up and says, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we took 3 really important clients to Claridge's on your behalf." And he said, "Well, could I have been there? I could have spoken to them." They said, "Oh no, that's not necessary." And he was like, "Can you tell me who it was?" And they were like, "Oh, and didn't say anything. He was like, "Who went?" And it was like the owner of the company and her 2 favorite girls, and then 3 people he'd never heard of. He never got any sales or any press from it, but they were trying to charge him. I'm not saying that all PR does this, but I think in certain places, as being a young designer is such a desirable thing now, there are certain people that maybe they start because they want to do it, and then they're promised certain things by agents or outsourcers. So they're like, "Yes, I can do that. I only have to pay this guy 10 grand, and he's going to get me the best press in the world." And I don't think it's always like that. And then maybe we become slightly jaded because we hear horror stories of people paying for tea in Claridge's when they're they don't have any food and they're eating baked beans. So the final one is more about your business, and don't pretend you're not. So I think we've all spoken about this in various ways, but it's quite obvious you are a business. And I don't even know what to say about this because it's just fun. Oh, this is a good one. Who knows what an elevator pitch is? Can you raise your hands? That's not many people. Okay, cool. So the next tip is look up what an elevator pitch is. So an elevator pitch is kind of what it says it is. It means that if you're stuck in a lift with someone who's important and they say, "Hey, what do?" You need to tell them what you do before they get to the floor that they're going to. So that means that you should explain exactly what you can do in 30 seconds. And that's the problem where a lot of people, when they're there for the lifestyle, they maybe don't know what they do, or they say, "Yeah, I'm very similar to Rick Owens, and I work with leather and all this stuff." But they don't actually say, "I make this much, I make my products in this volume, I have this many customers, this is who I'm selling to, and this is how much I am." Normally it's, and I think that's a problem. So for all you designers, remember you are a business and you need to behave like one. And I don't know if anyone has heard of this 80-20 rule, but it was actually done by a botanist. And he realized that plants work on basically 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the work. So 20% of what you do results to the 80%. So in theory, you could cut everything down. You would only have to work 20%, and you could achieve 80% worth of work. And I think this works with design, or with being a designer, is that it's business, and maybe the design side is actually the 20%, and the other 80% is simply actually selling it. People design stuff, you have it made, but then you have to actually be a business and behave like one. And I think if who was at Mercedes talk, it's buyers know what they're doing and they know who they're sort of working with. And if you come across as a kid who's not trustworthy, they're never gonna give you a chance, because you might rock up with the stuff and it might look good, but it might fall off the rails instantly. So the next bit is a bit more complicated. So this is about costings. And with costings, this is why everyone struggles, right? And it's about actually selling your stuff and where do you sell it and all that kind of stuff. So it's very easy for me to say you shouldn't do seasons. And it's very easy for me to say that I think young designers are too expensive and I think they should sell their work cheaper. And I don't think that they should go to PR agencies because I sit at my desk and I can say that. And that's very easy to say. But I do think with costings or with selling online, you need to be, or just selling full stop, you need to be realistic. And as a young designer, you're not just going to, you're very unlikely to just get a really cool store. Or if you do get a really cool store, which a lot of people aren't aware of, we've had a lot of horror stories. Again, I can't mention names, but for example, we had a designer and they were approached by a very, very well-known store based in Italy. And they said, this stuff's really cool. We really want to have it. And they were like, fantastic, it's so exciting. The best store in Italy. And they said, however, we need exclusivity, online and offline. So you can only sell with us, which isn't great because that means that you can only make a certain amount of money. Because if they only take 2 jumpers and both jumpers are £500, the most you're going to make in a year is £1,000 because that's all you're allowed to sell. But then they said, we'll only pay you after you've delivered it. So we'll pay you 90 days after you've given it to us. So that means that that designer would have to pay for the whole collection first and give it to them. But it's from sale or return. So that then means that if they don't sell anything, they could send it back. And that designer has made no money. And what's worse is they then say, oh, also, if we can't sell it, we're allowed to put it on sale. And we can put it on sale up to 50%. But we won't take that hit. You have to take that hit. So that means that if it was £1,000, they could sell it for £500, but the shop will still take that margin that they were going to take when it was sold for £1,000. So that means that in theory, a designer could actually come away from this losing money because they actually would have given away their product in theory for less than what they even paid to have it made. And this happens a lot. And so you have to be so careful with buyers. I'm not saying buyers are bad. But I think when you're a very, very young designer, you need to be really aware when you play that game of wholesale. And also, of course, if a great shop gives you this opportunity and then you turn up with a crap product that isn't good enough, they're going to send it back and then you're never going to get to work with them again. But there is another thing, which is online sales. So this is what Not Just a Label does, and we're not the only ones to do it, but I'll explain. Who knows what drop ship means? Like, honestly. Okay, 2 people. Okay, so listen to this, right? So how that works, we'll keep the maths simple for me. But say I made this jacket, and this jacket is £1,000. And I have it in a physical store, and the physical store sells it for £1,000. The designer, the buyers here might completely disagree, but the designer gets around 25% of that, so maybe 250, between 400-ish. From that, so all the rest goes to the shop. But the shop isn't being greedy, the shop has to pay for staff and for rent and all those kind of things. But if you sell something online, we don't have a shop, so we don't need to take that kind of margin. So if you sold a jacket for £1,000 on Not Just a Label, for example, which is dropship, you would have £700 because we take a 30% profit. So we would take £300, but you would take £700, which is way more than you would for wholesale. Obviously, wholesale has an advantage that you are guaranteed to sell a certain amount, so you only pay for the production of the orders that you have. So here you have to, of course, make stuff and keep it in stock, which might not be great, but you can do made to order, but I'll go into that in a second. So what that means is then you could sell something for a certain amount and you get a much higher profit margin. But then, if you're only selling online and you don't have any physical stores, you can then start playing around with the numbers, because do I need £700 for this jacket if it only cost me £100 to make or £200 to make? That's asking for a lot to take that pure profit. So maybe then I could actually afford to sell this purely online for cheaper and still make more money than I would if I was selling it wholesale. Again, this is like a springboard. So this is for the younger designers who simply want to make some money and also just test if their product even works. So this is a really good way you can do that. And then, but of course, you have to be aware that if you have a physical store and this jacket's in £1,000, you can't then put it online for £800 because you would upset your customers, upset the shop. But this is a way where you can really test things out. And these guys are cool. So these guys are called Jealousy, and they're two girls from Odessa in Ukraine. And they're one of our best sellers because what they did, they decided that they would use this as like a marketing opportunity where they knew that they weren't even designers, they're graphic designers, and they wanted to try something out. And they didn't have any money, but they wanted to gain some money. So what they did, they made a collection. It wasn't this collection. It looked really nice in the pictures, but they could have never sold it because the quality wasn't good enough. It was all they could afford. So they had this, which was just what they could use on websites and on here. But then they sold this earring. It was a little wooden earring like this, and it was called the horn earring, and it was £36 on our site. So that includes the commission that we take. We sold 200 of those in a month, and we've never come close to selling that kind of number before or since. And that's because they made it really cheap. And you could argue that it's worth doing that, and you're not actually underselling yourself as a brand, and that you're only going to sell your stuff for a certain amount, because you could say, well, they have to take a risk because they're buying online. They don't know the quality of it because they haven't touched it. They have no idea who you are, and you come from Odessa, and the customers in Sydney or in New York, so they're taking a risk. But then you're selling it to them cheaper, which is really good. So then what they did, they sold so many of these, and then they had an international fan base, people around the world that owned one of their rings. And when they came, then they had the money to actually make a proper collection the second time. And when they did that, they made their prices 20% more expensive to start bringing back that money. And they've slowly been doing that, and that's worked. And they haven't got a PR agency, but it's because there's not many PR agencies in Odessa. So they had to be clever the way that they did it. And the next thing is, which I've forgotten what I was going to say. What was I going to say? It was something about selling online. I can't remember what it was. But that's basically what I was going to say, what I wanted to talk about. And yeah, so I think the biggest thing is I really think designers should start really working out exactly who they want to sell to, because you need to understand that the customer is a real person. It's not just this mythical good-looking kid in Brooklyn that has loads of money. Well, there might be a few of those, but not enough to look after the whole designers. So that's what I believe in, and I think it is about cutting out a lot of work or cutting out a lot of agencies and doing your own work, doing your own PR, because you know your business better than anyone else does. As a scout, when I travel, nothing annoys me more if I go to a showroom and I get there and I say, can I speak to the designer? And they go, oh, she's gone out for lunch. And they're like, oh, but you can talk to Melissa. Melissa is the sales agent. And Melissa immediately gets a bit tense because she doesn't understand what we do. And she says, are you PR? And we go, well, not really PR. But then she thinks we're PR, so she won't talk to us because she's worried that we might steal her customer. So then she won't really talk to us properly, or she's trying to work out what we do. Or once I was at a showroom and I watched this woman go off and secretly Google me to see what was going on, because she had no idea what I was, and I think she was sort of frightened. So this is the problem where I think young designers can tell their own story, and you just need, if you pay to go to Paris, you need to just sit by your work the entire time. What's the point? It's not a holiday. You shouldn't go and see the Eiffel Tower. You should sit by your work. Because otherwise, if you spent, I don't know if I should or not, but Paris is very expensive. You can easily spend £4,000 there, if not a lot more. If you come back from Paris and you haven't made any sales, which is very likely, you need to be able to confidently say, was that worth £4,000 of the press? Because that's all I would have achieved because I haven't sold anything. So I think everyone knows how to act like a business, but maybe sometimes we get stuck in the rock and roll of fashion. I think that's about it.
How do you advise people, the designers on Not Just a Label, about quantities for the online retail? Because obviously, as a designer, you don't want to be sitting on dead stock, or you don't really know because you don't have order quantities or anything like that from buyers. What would you suggest? I mean, it's quite difficult.
Well, no, that's a good question, and I think I don't know if I can really come up with a good answer to that, because that's a very good point. But I sometimes get a bit irritated by that view, because that's people stuck in that mind that I'm only going to sell wholesale, and I'm only going to make when I'm guaranteed that I'm going to sell. But then it's not really guaranteed, because, like I said, there are certain stores that only work on sell or return. So if all your physical stores are on sell and return, it's the exact same thing as what we're asking, which you might disagree with. So
So explain to me what the difference between consignment, as in a retailer returning stuff, and dropship, where you don't return it because you never actually owned it, but the designer still took the risk of making the inventory.
Well, it's the same. It's the same.
Except,
But you have online is global, right? So you can reach more people.
and how many people actually buy globally a designer they've never heard of, who they don't know the fit or the quality of the product?
Well, that's what our shop is, right? So we do, the shop works, but of course, you're right. Trying to sell a £7,000 handmade dress is difficult, of course, because that's one of those risks. But if you're not selling it in a physical store, why not risk it and put it online? I mean, we can do made to order, but then again, trying to sell a made to order dress, which you have to wait 4 weeks for, is difficult. But I think when people don't have stockists, why not go for it with these other options of making money? Or, I mean, the stuff that we do sell, our average price is £250 to £550. Jewelry is the easiest thing to sell online because you don't have fit issues. You have 10 fingers, or most of you do. So if it doesn't fit, you just put it on another finger. So it's very easy to sell online jewelry, and of course it's a decent price. But yeah, that comes with it. But then also it's quite hard to sell a £6,000 dress in a physical store too.
Drop shipping. What do you do when your customer orders something and the designer does not have the size, or is late in sending it, or is looking at things in Paris?
Okay, cool. That's a very good question. Our platform is quite powerful in where I don't know who knows much about online stores, but basically every single product and every single size we have is a different variation. So if you have small, medium, and large, when someone clicks on that and buys that, it immediately takes that off. So if you only have one small, one medium, and one large, when that's bought, the other one, it just comes off, so you can't buy it anymore. We also have a way where when people go on holiday, or they're going to Paris, that you said, or they physically are too busy to take orders, they have a holiday mode so they can take products off. We work in a way where basically we let our designers control it. So, I mean, we're quite strict with them. We have a zero tolerance policy. So if they start cocking about, we just take them off the store. Because again, we haven't invested in them financially, so we can just pull them off.
And then the last one from a practical perspective, returns. So
we're quite
fit. I want to get rid of it. What do you do?
So we do with returns. If it's made to order, which might not be for the best, but we always protect the designer, because if a designer has put made to order and they've sold like a £6,000 dress and they've started making it, and then the customer says, actually, I don't want it anymore, or it turns up and they don't like it, but it's not faulty, but they don't like it, we stand with the designer, which might not be great for our customers, but we do that because if it's in the wrong time, that could bankrupt the designer if they then have to give that money back, and then they're stuck with this thing that they can't afford. We're quite good with returns because this sort of authentic luxury and it's slow. We don't make the kind of orders like ASOS does. Our returns rate is 0.4%. So we very, very rarely return things, and if we do, it's because the quality is not good enough. So, I mean, sometimes that happens, of course. We have people that, I should have said how this works is that when you sell a product, it goes straightly from the designer to the customer. So we don't actually see it. We don't actually touch it. I mean, people don't start selling with us until we have seen it at some point, but we haven't seen that actual item they send. So if it's rubbish, then of course we send it back. But we do have a very low returns rate. It's different with people like ASOS. When if you spend over £100, you get free delivery. Everyone just spends £100, even if they only actually want one thing, because then they can get the free delivery, and it's super easy just to return the rest. So companies like that have massive returns, and we don't. So we kind of get away with that one. Any other questions or objections or complaints?
I just have one quick question. You mentioned in your delivery that designers typically shouldn't focus on, don't want to misquote you, but shouldn't focus on building their brand when they haven't made any money. And I just wondered, at what point in that case would you suggest that a designer becomes a brand? Is it once they've made money, or?
I think it's when they have a product. I mean, it's not all around the world, but certainly in London, we have a bit of a thing where everyone wants to be involved in the fashion world. And I've met a million freelance creative directors, and they're freelance, but they've never actually had a job. And sometimes with designers, we have people that say, I want to be a designer, and they have the amazing website and they have the PR company, but their production just simply isn't ready. And then if they do manage to get into a store, it's just returned because it's not good enough. So I would say, I mean, obviously you have to promote your brand, but do it yourself, and certainly don't pay someone to do it for you until you're ready. But of course, with press, if people start using your stuff for press, which is great, and you start turning up in magazines, and a potential customer opens up the page and says, whoa, this bag is super cool, where can I buy it? And there's no stockists, then what was the point of that press? Because it hasn't converted into sales. And that's kind of what we need to do in order to carry on making what we make. So I don't know if that's helped.
I own a new brand. We just started just working on our first collection. And one of the tricky things was pricing. Because we put our price based on the position we want our brand to be in the market in. And as a new brand, people would come and say, we love the quality, we love the style, but it's quite expensive because you're still new. Should we stand our ground?
That's a good one. You've actually just reminded me of the thing that I forgot to say earlier. What it was a story about costings, and we had a designer based in London, and she was selling through us, and she got quite a lot of attention, and she had a jumper on sale with us. And it was a really nice jumper, but it was expensive. It was £400. And she called me up one day and she said, I've not sold, not just a label shit. So while I was on the phone, I went on to Mr. Porter, because she sold menswear, and I said, cool, what can we buy for 400 quid? I could buy 2 Paul Smith jumpers, and for £25 more, I could buy a Magella. And my career is based on working with young designers, but even I was like, I would get the Margiela one, because you're actually a graduate, you're making this yourself. I said, you're far too expensive. And she said, oh no, but my business manager told me that this is how we do it. We work out our costing and we times it by 2, then we times it by 2.7 or whatever you want to use, and then we get to that price, which I think is fine. And of course, that's how you have to behave with wholesale. But when we use like digital platforms like consignment or dropship, you can start playing with those numbers. And I think that advice that we give to our designers in terms of costings, obviously we can look at the maths, and I think it's different for every designer. However, I think it's a good idea to pick your hero brands, or the brands that you would one day like to become, or maybe not become, but fit into that realm, and you should be 30% cheaper than these guys. And then you can somehow approach the fan base of these people. For example, we have a designer that makes these really cool shoes, and they are very similar to Rick Owens shoes. They are very similar. They're big, black, puffy trainer, high tops. But his are all made in London, completely by himself. His are actually £200 cheaper than Rick Owens ones. Now that's really cool. So that means that I could buy his trainers for £400, but the Rick Owens are £600. He's not copying Rick Owens, but certainly in that realm. And that's a really good example of what he knows what he wants to do, but then he's been able to sell a product that's cheaper and far more superior because it's been handmade by a skilled craftsman. So I think in terms of costings, that's a really good story or a really interesting point of view. But of course you need to make money. And another thing with costings, it's not just the material was £200, and I had to pay someone for a day rate to make it. So that becomes it's £400. You also have to remember that you're paying for the building that you're working in. Your time, tax, your phone bill, your internet bill, traveling. I mean, it's very hard to work that out in terms of what you do, but you need to have some idea that should go into your costings, because your true cost is your whole time. The time that you spent designing it, you should still really be getting paid for that, not just the making time. Otherwise, you're designing for free. So I think with costings, I mean, I'm not at all saying that I've cracked the code on that one, but I think it's not just about having a formula and the maths. I think it's the end product has to be realistic. Again, like I was saying, you can't just have a jacket that's really cool and it's based for a young kid. But if it comes up at £2,000 or £800, he's not going to be able to buy that. Or for another 50 quid, he could just go and buy the Christopher Rayburn one that he would probably rather have.
What's the average sales per month you have?
The average sales?
Yes.
In terms of number?
Yes. Items.
Oh, items. Oh, I mean, we have slow months and good months, but I think the average order is around 90 items a month. So, I mean, that's just the honest number. I don't know if that's really good or if that's quite low, but that is how much we sell, about 90 a month.
And the second question, all of your designers, 17,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have exclusive contract with you?
No, we don't. I should have said, actually, not all designers sell with us. So we have 17,000 designers, 1,000 black sheep, and then only 200 of those black sheep sell with us. So the kind of idea is once the bag is in our shop, it's already come out of a massive bucket of designers. So it's curated in that sense. So they don't all sell us. It's basically invitation to sell.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Do you have any designers from Dubai or Middle East?
Mm-hmm. We have, I looked this up, we have exactly 57 designers. One of them is Khalid, who's waving at me. We have 57 designers from Dubai, and we have around 400 designers from the Middle East in total.
My name is Ala Ismail. I'm the CEO and founder of Salesmina. Just have a comment for the gentleman who asked about the brand. In fact, if you look through history, there is no brand built before you sell it. So it's basically you need to think about selling your product before you're thinking about the brand. So sales comes first, and everybody has something to sell. Now, most of the people have an excellent product. So before you start thinking about having a big brand of this product, you need to at least know a little bit about sales. Now, how to start? Do you start selling first, or you start building your brand and producing your product? Well, my suggestion is you have at least a traction before you spend so much money on your product. So there are so many people, they can sell their product before they even produce it. Now, that's excellent as far as you can deliver it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
My question is about pricing. I understand now that affordable luxury is what most people are into right now. And I started my brand. My prices are quite reasonable, but with time, the price of material also increases for me as well. So my question is, what would be the percentage to increase in price? And then at the same time, is it once a year would I increase, or is it twice a year, or every 2 years? Because you have to with time. Your costs start to increase.
That's a very good question. I know that Mercedes, who's sitting here, is going to get angry because she was saying that this is really bad to do this. But I think when you're starting out, you should try and don't undersell yourself, of course, but you should be cheap enough to someone who's willing to take a risk in you. And I do think you then will have to go up more. do you want to maybe take over?
About the pricing, me personally, right? And I'll tell you a dirty joke afterwards, but there is no right or wrong way of doing business. There really isn't. The best you can do is get all the advice, different points of view. I mean, Robert, I think you're more like the end-use consumer. I am more of the wholesale and the bigger picture, right? Owning the plane. It's okay. We all have to start somewhere. But to answer your question, as a rule, was that heckling?
Yeah, that was
I owe you dinner,
heckling.
okay. As a rule, you could always mark down, but you can't mark up. Once you're considered like that price point brand, even though your cost increased, the buyers expect more because they expect you to be selling more, and then the economy of scale thing should be actually cheaper for you to produce than when you first started. So every year, if I was to follow that Walmart mentality, I want better quality and a cheaper price. So it's easier or better if you position yourself. And again, you're going to do your price study. You're going to figure out who you hang with, who you aspirational brands to be with are. And I would always err in being higher because you could always discount, you could always mark down. At retail, you could always have a sale. But once you're at that price, you pigeonhole yourself, and it's almost impossible to go up. That doesn't mean you couldn't start another line. Like look at Mary-Kate and Ashley with the row. They started with the middle price, the advanced contemporary price. Then they went designer, and then they went downscale too. So you could have the good, better, best pricing. Personally, I would start at the middle high and then work my way up the both canals.
Okay,
I'm Zaki from K2 TV. Could you please tell me one thing? Like, do you have a checklist? Like some of the designers from the subcontinent, I know the product, I know the stuff. Could we just?
So, what do you mean checklist?
Let me explain, if you don't mind. If you can get a product for $100, and that person is selling it for 1,000, and you know it's not expensive than 1,000. So, what about you? I mean, do you have a checklist for that designer? Do you include it without any checking?
Oh, do you mean as in, do we just let designers sell for what they want to sell?
Exactly, yeah.
No, I mean, we have a team that works with costings, but again, again, it's very easy for me to say these things because I sit at my desk and I talk to designers and I go, oh, I don't do seasons, and but I do think costings should have a bit of feeling in them too, and I think that you can't always just follow the maths. We work with designers in terms of that because if something literally just sounds too expensive, then it probably is just a bit too expensive for what it is. I mean, people know, if they're going to spend £6,000 and they're willing to spend £6,000, and that's not a problem with money, but they'll know if the product is worth that kind of cash or not. So no, I mean, we wouldn't just let a designer rock up and just say, yeah, this is a £10,000 ring when it's resin and it's made in a mold that they can make 100 of. But of course, if they want to do that, and for some reason we decided to let them, then fine. I mean, we're online, so it doesn't cost us. But they just will never sell it, so it's kind of redundant. I don't know if that helps. I think that's done.